Naomi is 26, an ICU nurse, 3 12-hour shifts a week. 6 months ago, she made a change. Instead of saving 15% of every paycheck, she dropped it to 10. She calls it self-care. There's an actual name for it, soft saving. And underneath the cozy branding, there's a number nobody posts alongside it. First thing worth knowing, this isn't irresponsibility, and it's not a discipline problem. Soft saving is one of the fastest-growing money mindsets among people under 30, common enough that it's made national news more than once in the last few months, right alongside financial planners warning it could quietly wreck a determination. It's the financial version of quiet quitting. Instead of grinding toward an aggressive number, max the retirement account, live lean, retire decades early. You save what actually feels sustainable and spend the rest on the life you're living right now. It sits at the opposite end of the spectrum from FIRE, financial independence, retire early, where some people save as much as 70% of their income to leave the workforce decades early. This isn't some fringe internet niche either. Soft living content alone has racked up over 10 billion views on TikTok. And for good reason. TikTok is Gen Z's single biggest source of financial advice right now, ahead of banks, parents, and financial advisors combined. A recent survey found over 2/3 of Gen Z say they've actually tried a financial trend they saw online, more than double the rate of Gen X. And ask anyone under 30 about their little treat, and watch how fast they light up. It's become specific enough that surveys now track it directly. More than half of Gen Z say they buy themselves one at least once a week. For Naomi, that's the ceramics class and the occasional blowout. Small, individually reasonable, and exactly where that redirected 5% quietly goes. It's not a self-serving story younger people are telling themselves either. A recent national poll found most American adults across age groups agree it's genuinely harder to save today than it was a generation ago. Older generations largely agree with the premise, even when they disagree with the response to it. Two completely reasonable positions, both getting louder at the same time. Financial planners aren't wrong to be nervous. The compounding math genuinely is real, and by the end of this, you'll see exactly why. So the honest answer isn't trend good or trend bad. It's worth understanding why this is happening before deciding which side holds up. Here's what's actually driving it. Ask people under 30 what retirement means to them, and a lot hesitate. Not because they don't want one, but because it doesn't feel like a real, reachable place. Home prices have pulled wildly out of proportion to wages compared to a generation ago. The old deal, sacrifice now, get rewarded later, only works if later actually shows up on schedule. And a lot of this generation has watched it not show up for people only a few years ahead of them. When a future goal starts to feel abstract, the brain stops weighting it the same way it weights something certain and immediate. That's not a discipline failure. It's a well-documented bias toward the present, sharper right now because the finish line keeps drifting further away while the entry fee keeps climbing. There's a term for part of what's fueling that feeling too: filtered finances. Basically, the money version of a heavily edited photo. Everyone's posting their soft life aesthetic, their little treats, their spontaneous weekend trip. Nobody's posting their 401k balance. So the comparison people are actually making isn't to real people's real finances, it's to everyone else's highlight reel, which makes "why even bother sacrificing" feel a lot louder than it probably should. But here's the other side of this, and it's just as real. Theo, 34, found FIRE at 24 and went all in. 70% of every paycheck, no vacations for 6 years. He hit his number at 31, quit his job, and wasn't happy. He'd spent so long treating every dollar as a threat to the plan that he'd forgotten how to spend one without anxiety behind it. He's back at work now, not because he needs the money, but because he doesn't know who he is without the grind. Naomi's old 15% life and Theo's 70% life were both, in their own way, unsustainable. The money was never really the problem for either of them. It was what the number was standing in for. This isn't a story with a clean villain. Sacrificing everything for the future can break you just as badly as ignoring it can. Knowing why this is happening doesn't make the math disappear, though. And the math is where this gets real. So here's the number that doesn't make it into the cozy version of this trend. Naomi's gap, the 5% she redirected, comes out to about $2,900 a year. Left invested for 35 years at a realistic long-term market return, that yearly gap compounds into something in the ballpark of $380,000 by the time she's 61. Here's what makes timing matter more than the percentage itself. That same gap, closed for the first time 10 years later instead of now, only has 25 years left to grow, and the total drops to somewhere closer to $180,000, less than half. Not because the money's worth less, because it lost a decade of compounding it never gets back. Put plainly, that's not, she'll retire a little later. Depending on the rest of her plan, a gap that size can be the difference between a retirement that absorbs a bad year without panic and one where a single bad year becomes a real crisis. And none of this shows up anywhere in Naomi's day-to-day life. Her bills still get paid on time. The cost is invisible for 35 straight years. Right up until the moment, it isn't. The fix isn't, stop soft saving, go back to the 15% that burned you out. That's not realistic, and burnout has its own cost. It just doesn't show up on a compound interest chart. It's also not, go all in like Theo did, because that trade has its own bill, just a different currency. 3 smaller moves instead of one big sacrifice. First, pick one number and protect it before softening anything else. Automate it the moment the paycheck lands, somewhere you never see it, so you never get the chance to negotiate with yourself. Then, soften everything after that. Second, revisit that number every time income moves. A raise is exactly when this slips. The new money gets absorbed into the softer lifestyle before it ever becomes a bigger baseline. Third, put a ceiling on the sacrifice too, not just a floor on the saving. If a savings goal is costing sleep, relationships, or every ounce of joy, the way it did for Theo, that's not virtue, that's just a different version of the same problem. The goal was never to suffer efficiently, it was to build a life that holds up on both ends of it. Not just at 65, but on a random Tuesday at work too. Naomi's version of this now. The 10% isn't a ceiling, it's the floor. Every time her hourly rate goes up, that number moves first, automatically, before the softer 5% even notices there's more room to spend.